NATO's foreign ministers are holding their first meeting in Brussels since a draft peace plan to end the war in Ukraine was proposed. In his opening remarks, its General Secretary, Mark Rutte, condemned Russia's actions and reaffirmed the organisation's support for Ukraine as it heads into the winter months. There's been a deepening concern that European allies have been sidelined over the talks, which have been primarily led by Russia and the US. Here's what Mark Rutte said earlier.
We face real and lasting dangers. Russia continues to test our deterrence. Russia has violated our airspace with jets and drones, conducted sabotage and sent spy ships into our waters. These actions are reckless and they are dangerous. And it's not Russia alone. It is working closely with China, North Korea and Iran to attempt to disrupt our societies and tear up the global rules. They are preparing for long-term confrontation. And we are responding with strength, unity and resolve. European allies and Canada are really stepping up defence investments, and that's good. But we cannot afford to rest on our laurels. We all need to pull our weight and fast. We need to develop and buy core capabilities for our defence and invest in industry, in infrastructure and innovation to stimulate production and boost resilience. We also need to support Ukraine more. Russian missiles keep causing death and destruction, and winter is here. Ukraine needs our support more than ever. We all want the bloodshed to stop, and I strongly welcome President Trump's continued efforts to end this war. Meanwhile, we must accelerate our contributions to Pearl to get urgently needed equipment to Ukraine so that it can defend itself today and prevent aggression in the future.
Mark Rutte. Well, ahead of the meeting, the UK pledged £10 million to support the repair of energy infrastructure in Ukraine that's been damaged by Moscow's attacks. Here's the Foreign Secretary, Yvette Cooper.
We have seen in recent days President Trump and the US pursue a just and lasting peace for Ukraine and for the Ukrainian people, and for President Zelensky to pursue their willingness for a ceasefire and for a just and lasting peace for Ukraine. But instead, what we have seen is President Putin simply seek to escalate war, and we've seen over the weekend the continuing strikes, the heavy strikes that have led to power being switched off for hundreds of thousands of people. And that is why today I'm announcing the UK's additional £10 million to support energy infrastructure repairs in Ukraine, because whilst President Putin is seeking to switch the lights off and plunge Ukraine into darkness, we will continue to work to switch the lights back on. And we will continue to show our support for the Ukrainian people, for the sovereignty of Ukraine, and for a just and lasting peace with the security of Europe and the security of NATO at its heart. Thank you.
Yvette Cooper. Well, it comes the day after talks in Moscow between President Putin and the US envoy Steve Witkoff ended without a breakthrough. Russian negotiators described the 5-hour meeting as productive and useful, but the Kremlin said there was still much work to do. Let's speak to our correspondent Joel Gunter, who's in Kiev. Where are we left then with these talks, Joel?
We're left a little bit where we were yesterday. There was not a great expectation here in Kyiv of a breakthrough last night. There were, as you mentioned, 5 hours of talks. The language coming out of the Kremlin after that saying that they were constructive, rich in substance. But it's clear that the Russians still find certain points on this draft peace plan unacceptable. There are still red lines on both sides. I've been speaking to members of the Ukrainian parliament this morning. The feeling here is that any plan that involves Ukraine having to cede territory that Russia hasn't already captured on the battlefield would be a red line. And the other key red line here for the Ukrainians is security guarantees from their European and US partners. So waking up this morning here in Kyiv, still a feeling of quite a long way to go, and still clear red lines on both sides.
What, though, Joel, is the role for Europe in this? Because we were hearing that NATO feel that they're somewhat on the European continent being sidelined.
Yeah, absolutely. And we have seen just, in the presentation and in the substance of this process so far, the Europeans, a sense that the European partners are being sidelined. Under the second Trump administration, the importance of the Ukrainian partners for Ukraine has only risen. But of course, negotiations have been taking place, negotiations and informal conversations between the US and the Russians. We had this leaked 28-point draft peace plan, which took the Europeans and the Ukrainians almost completely by surprise, and it was said by many to echo the maximalist demands of Russia, as if some of the points on the peace plan had almost been drafted by the Kremlin itself. That set off a scramble within Europe to try and push back on some of the points in this plan. And obviously, European allies are active at the moment trying to support Ukraine, offer additional monetary support and security guarantees from, for Ukraine in this peace process. Probably need to come from the US, but they also need to come from Europe.
How hopeful are the Ukrainian people that this will lead to peace?
I wouldn't say that there is a sense of a great deal of hope at the moment, because we can see in these negotiations that the two sides are still quite far apart on key points. Russia wants to take additional territory in eastern Ukraine that it hasn't captured. That is a very sensitive, very emotional and very difficult issue for the Ukrainians, a red line for many of them. I can't say there's a great sense of hope. There is a sense of need. There is a sense that after nearly 4 years of this grinding full-scale invasion, which has cost a great deal for the Ukrainian people, there is a sense among many of them that tough compromises need to be made and that a peace process needs to bring an end to this conflict in some way.
Joel, for the moment, thank you very much. Joel Gunter, our correspondent in Kiev. Let's speak to Michael Bosacue, a non-resident senior fellow at the Atlantic Council's Eurasia Centre and the founder of the World Briefing Report on Substack. Michael, good to have you here with us on BBC News. How meaningful have these talks been so far?
Good to be back with you. Well, there's a lot of depression, I would say, here in Kiev. And, it reminds me of the following scenario, all things considered, is you have Mr. Witkoff and Mr. Trump, who are golf buddies, swinging wildly in a sand trap set by the Russians. Meanwhile, you have Mr. Putin way up the fairway, laughing all the way. You have the Europeans outside of the golf course still trying to understand the nature of golf. And then you have Mr. Zelensky stuck in the golf cart trying to get in on the action. So what the Ukrainians need right now, as your correspondent hinted at, are weapons, weapons, and weapons. There is some good news that their own production of military weapons represents about 50% of what they need, but still a lot more needed at the moment, especially after Mr. Putin's threats in the past 48 hours, I believe, to sea blockade Ukraine. They don't have the naval capability to do that, so that'll be done by drones and missiles, and I fear for the city I'm based in, Odessa, because of that statement.
Tell us what you think Russia even has to gain by agreeing a peace deal, because at the moment it seems like they're calling the shots.
They are, and as your colleague Steve Rosenberg reported, Mr. Ushakov said no compromises have been made. So what that signals to me and many others is that the Russians are playing the long game. They're trying to, again, trap the Americans, long negotiations, dangling incredible economic opportunities that will help make America great again, make Mr. Trump great again. But I think this is all delusional. And, the best thing probably that could happen right now is if the Americans step back, because they've shown their incompetence at getting any gains in this peace process, and handing it over to much more capable interlocutors such as the Turks.
On Tuesday, Marco Rubio, the US Secretary of State, said the president is trying to end the war despite having a million things to focus on. I mean, how much more pressing is there anything in his in tray but Ukraine?
Yeah, exactly. And as Mr. Rutte indicated, if something isn't done now, Mr. Putin will go further. Look, the best thing, we were on a panel yesterday with the East Europe Foundation. Bill Taylor, the former US ambassador to Ukraine, one of the greatest experts right now in Ukraine, said Ukraine, the best thing the US could do right now is, aside from providing missiles, are security guarantees in these talks. And that means no reduction in the Ukrainian armed forces size, because they're the best security guarantee you can have, but also a firm commitment from the United States to backstop the coalition of the willing, and a clear statement that if shots are fired, they will respond. And finally, what Europe could do, if you ask me, get those frozen Russian assets to Ukraine as soon as possible, because we were told last night at this panel as well that that could provide financial stability for Ukraine for 3 whole years. If Ukraine doesn't get money by February, you'll start to see cutbacks in payments of pensions, teacher salaries, and other crucial expenses. It's a very, very difficult time right now.
Michael, as ever, really good to talk to you. Thank you very much for your time. Michael Bossack from the Atlantic Council. Thank you.
পাগলি রে তুই প্রেম শিখাইয়া পাগল বানাইলি, দেহ থইয়া কেন রে তুই মনটা পোড়াইলি। পাগলি রে তুই প্রেম শিখাইয়া পাগল বানাইলি, দেহ থইয়া কেন রে তুই মনটা পোড়াইলি। এখন আমার মনটা পুরে কয়লা হয়েছে, জানি না রে কাহার প্রেমে মুগ্ধ রয়েছি। পাগলি রে তুই প্রেম শিখাইয়া পাগল বানাইলি, দেহ তুইয়া কেন রে তুই মনটা পোড়াইলি। কেউ পুরে প্রেম আগুনে, কেউ বা তুষের আগুন। প্রেম আগুনে মন পুরে যার চলে আরো দ্বিগুণ। কেউ পুরে প্রেম আগুনে, কেউ বা তুষের আগুন। প্রেম আগুনে মন পুরে যার চলে আরো দ্বিগুণ। কোন আগুনে পুরাইলি তুই করলি বেইমানি, দেহ তুইয়া কেন রে তুই মনটা পোড়াইলি। পাগলি রে তুই প্রেম শিখাইয়া পাগল বানাইলি, দেহ তুইয়া কেন রে তুই মনটা পোড়াইলি। প্রেমের আগুন যার অন্তরে, সেই জানে তার ব্যথা। পাগল হইয়া পাগল বেশে কয় যে প্রেমের কথা। প্রেমের আগুন যার অন্তরে, সেই জানে তার ব্যথা। পাগল হইয়া পাগল বেশে কয় যে প্রেমের কথা। সেই অন্তরে আঘাত দিবি আগে বুঝিনি, দেহ তুইয়া কেন রে তুই মনটা পোড়াইলি। পাগলি রে তুই প্রেম শিখাইয়া পাগল বানাইলি, দেহ তুইয়া কেন রে তুই মনটা পোড়াইলি। হা 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 লা 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 লা।